All right, guys, good to see you all. We've got 23 of us on here right now. We'll let others trickle in. We're about 3 minutes after. Some of you have already been on a call where we've been lucky enough to have Josh, or maybe you were even at the office. Josh has presented for us a couple of times and we love having him back. Known Josh for over 15 years. Dude, your wedding was like 15 years ago.
It's actually 15 years this September. Yeah, you're spot on.
Isn't that crazy? So I've known you almost 20.
Yeah.
And it's been great. Josh is a great friend. Did investing together. At one time, Josh owed well over 100 units himself. So I like Josh's perspective on lending because he's personally involved in the space as well. So I think Josh, you might agree, but an investor / lender looks at data and trends a little bit different than just loan products and availability for their clients. You really do kind of add a whole new dimension as a lender. So all of you are here on this call. Josh has teams in all 50 states, okay? I encourage each one of you to reach out to Josh, and we'll make sure we get his contact information at the end of this at some point, but have a strategy meeting with him. See how he might be able to help your business, because he's got a lot of tools and resources available that you might be surprised that he can help you with. And so I encourage you all to set that up. Again, Josh, thank you so much. We're so happy to see you. We should just do a Zoom once in a while just so we can see your
I say we just come up with a cure for this coronavirus thing and get together in person and hug it out.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. I am definitely neglecting in the hug area. So, okay, guys, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Josh. Eric, unless you had anything to add, we'll just let Josh kind of take it over.
Oh, just that I concur. Josh and I closed our first transaction together in 2003 and has yet to fail me. So, I mean, just fantastic lender and, has great knowledge and expertise in the industry. So thanks again, Josh. Appreciate you being on.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And that'll be the last salesmanship that you'll get from me on this or about me on this presentation, because I really just come to bring value. And when I am invited to these types of meetings, which I love sharing time with you all, the thought that crosses my mind is what's the biggest challenge and what is the predominant objection that we're getting from buyers and sellers, and how do we introduce data that can overcome the drama? So what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from clients, and maybe give me a thumbs up or something if you're agreeing with me, but there are a decent segment of the population that is just freaked out from what they see on Crisis News Network, and it doesn't matter what news channel. I mean, there's always a blazing emergency dumpster fire somewhere that is just freaking people out. And the objection that I'm hearing most frequently from clients is, are we headed into another 2006, 7, 8, 9? Is that what is ahead? Is anybody hearing that? Am I the only one that's getting that from clients a little bit? Like, hey, I'm just gonna wait this one out and wait for the big crash? Okay. So I think that's a lot of fear mongering, and I think it's a lot of drama, and I think we can overcome it with a good amount of data. So that's what I hope to do today. I wrote an article a week or so back with the most current data that I could find. We turned that into a video. I've already sent that stuff to Sydney. So everything I'm going to share with you today, you'll get in a video form. That's a long format, about a 13-minute video, and then also an article. So if you wanted to take some of that and turn it into your social media posts, please do so. If you wanted to take that and just send your clients that are saying, I'm just going to wait here on the sidelines until the $500,000 house sells for $250,000, like, good luck. Let's dive into the data and steer away from the drama a little bit. The other thing that I'll just bring up to you that I sent to Sydney was I listened to an interview with Tom Ferry and Dave Savage, who is the CEO of Mortgage Coach, a week ago. And he had such a crazy, brilliant business idea on how to get buyer and listing leads by creating these kind of Zoom webinars, similar to like what we're going to do today. But instead of it being a bunch of mortgage and real estate folks, you would invite all your past clients and all their friends and family, and you would go about promoting these Zoom educational summits, if you will, or lunch and learns, whatever you want to call them, and you would go about combating the drama with more and more real-time information and data. So That video also was sent to Sydney. If you guys want to check that out, I thought there were some great business ideas. Tom mentioned that one of his students that he coaches did their first one, did everything wrong, and they got 8 listing appointments. So I kind of modeled this more or less after what I would do with a bunch of clients. So
hey guys, if you want to open up your chat, I went ahead and copied those links that Josh had sent us, and they're in the chat. So go ahead and just copy those or click on them, open up your browser, and it'll just be there for you to look at after the call.
Cool. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to just launch this PowerPoint, try and navigate all the Zoom buttons. Wish me luck there from the beginning. All right, cool. So can you see that slide that says debunking the COVID-19 housing crash? Perfect. All right, great. Let me get rid of this video side here so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, cool. So here's the reality. The reality is that COVID-19 is one of the most deflationary global events to hit the earth since the meteor that took out the dinosaurs. You know, never before has basically every country in the world had stay-at-home orders all at the same time, kind of grinding the economy of the world to a halt. All of that is very true. However, that doesn't mean that it's going to be a deflationary event for housing. And one of the big misnomers that my clients have that I have to continually try to challenge their assumption on is that an economic recession equals housing crash. People just link those two things together because the last recession was centered in real estate and there was a housing crash connected to it. So we have to use data to decouple those two things and show them that yes, this is a globally deflationary event. This is a global recession, but it doesn't mean that housing is going to react the same way it did the last time we had a recession in the United States with the mortgage meltdown. So here's a couple of reasons why that real estate could still have really good appreciation. There's potentially greater inflationary pressures than there is deflationary pressures. And I'm gonna rip through these with some really nice data and graphs, but let me just give you the brief overview. We've got record low inventory. We've got rising home ownership rates. We've got changing demographics. There's some amazing information here on demographics that really blew my mind. Home prices are being aided by low interest rates, and homeowners are sitting on record amounts of home equity. By the way, there was just a story I read yesterday in Forbes that as of May 2020, Utah has the second lowest unemployment rate in the country. So, you know, not every state or city was hit equally as hard by COVID. We know that from a medical standpoint, but from an employment standpoint, Utah is still doing incredibly well. So, record low inventory, reason number one that housing can still do really well in the face of this deflationary phase that we're seeing with COVID. So if we look back to 2007, we see that existing housing inventory was at 3.7 million homes for sale, kind of at that peak of the inventory before things really started to crumble. And if we fast forward to today, we have current housing inventory. By the way, this was the end of 19. I think this was fourth quarter data. You're looking at about 1.8 million homes for sale. So you literally have less than half the number of homes for sale now as you did compared to where we entered the last recession. This is a huge, huge differentiator between where the real estate market is now versus where it was then. And virtually nobody understands that data. In fact, if you go back all the way to 83, so we're talking about 37 years, you're looking at inventory levels that are lower than anything in recent history. So whenever you've got a very low inventory and a pretty good demand, and we'll get into that a little bit more, that's simple Econ 101, supply and demand. You're going to see buoyancy for housing prices and most likely higher housing prices, especially in areas like Utah that still have incredibly low unemployment rates. So here's a few other just pieces of data that you'll find in that article that I sent you. There's 382.2 million people in the US right now and 128 million households. So think of that, 128 million households and only 1.8 million houses for sale. That's an incredible perspective. Another way to look at that is for every 100 households in the US, there's only 1.4 homes for sale. Only 1.4 home for sale for every 100 households. So as we go through this COVID crisis, we do it with a drastic undersupply of housing, less than 50% before we entered the last recession. Reason number two is that we'll defy that we should debunk the housing crash is rising homeownership rates. So if you remember what happened going back to the lead up to the Great Recession, housing got pretty dang expensive, and interest rates weren't nearly as good as they are now. And so you started to see that home ownership rate kind of peak right there around 2004, 2005. Most people, if they were affording houses, were using stated income loans, stated asset, didn't need much in credit. And you started to see that home ownership rate trend down even before the credit standards even started to tighten, because a lot of people were just saying, this is just too expensive. This isn't really feasible for my economic picture. And then we see the gray bar starting late 2007, 2008. The gray bar marks a recession, by the way. And we see this is where people are starting to lose jobs. We're seeing their 401ks slash in half. We're seeing their values of their homes being slashed. And we have these millennials and younger generations that watch their parents go through this, losing their retirement, losing their jobs, losing their house. Unfortunately, a lot of them lost marriages. I mean, it was a really traumatic time. And those millennials, as they moved out of their parents' houses, they played it safe. I've read a lot of articles talking about how millennials just feel more comfortable renting and with their money in checking and savings accounts at 0.2% than they do investing in real estate, investing in stock, investing in gold, other types of kind of typical investments. Well, something interesting happened late 2016. We started to see that home ownership rate start to increase. So now that trend has kind of reversed itself. Those millennials or younger folks, the National Association of Realtors tells us the average first-time home buyer is 33 years old. So now those millennials have been out on their own for a while, and they're looking around and they're going, hey, this owning a home thing has worked out pretty good for my buddies who bought a home. Maybe I should get in. And so we're starting to see a reverse in that trend, which again speaks to the demand side of the equation. So we first talked about the supply of housing. Now we're going to talk a little bit about demand, which is moving more in our favor. Demographics are also moving in our favor. And I find this information just incredibly insightful if you take a few minutes to really dig in and understand this data. So what this chart shows you is the comparison between household growth, so that's the number of new household formations, as compared to the number of annual housing completions. So what you'll notice from 2002, let's call that all the way to like 2010, probably that whole, that period of time, you're starting to see, excuse me, let me say that again. Yeah, exactly. In that whole kind of decade, you're seeing annual completions, the gold or orange bars, exceed household growth. Well, that makes sense, right? We had a ton of inventory. That's when we had 3.7 million homes for sale, because we had more annual housing completions than we had household growth. Well, you notice around 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, that kind of bottoms out, and we start to see a leveling off where household growth, the number of new household formations, starts to meet the number of new homes being completed. And then we go into this kind of deficit situation. So look what starts happening in 2015. More household formations than there are annual completions. Inventory starts to trend down. 16, 17, 18, 19, and look at the gap. Look at the gap between the number of new households being formed and the number of new annual housing completions. we're getting more and more of a gap, and that also results in less and less and less inventory. Now, coincidentally, let's see what happened to home prices during that time. Remember, we had kind of a leveling out of completions versus household growth in this 10 to 13 phase. And starting in 14, you really start to see household growth start to take off. If we look at median home prices for the entire United States, we notice kind of a similar pattern. We notice a peak in prices, we notice a trough, and then kind of a leveling out through that same period of time. And once we hit 2014, you start to see a real increase in housing price, directly correlated to this shortage. It's supply and demand. When we have, going back now, I guess this would be almost 7 years, going into our 7th year, where we have the number of household growth equal to or greater than the number of completions, you're going to have more demand than you have supply, you're going to have competition for housing, and you're going to have increasing home prices. Jeff, I'm going to just keep rolling, but if at any time you want to just pause me, feel free to jump in here. Just invitation's wide open.
You know, that goes to everybody, right? Josh, we were just talking about this before we let everybody into the room. It's really kind of hard to do these on Zoom versus in person. And so you guys feel free to jump in, just unmute yourselves, put something in the chat. I'm trying to keep an eye on that. But definitely this can be conversation as well. And I know we're all taking notes and listening to you, Josh. So we're still with you.
All right, great. Just wanted to open that door up.
Perfect.
All right. So we're still talking about demographics, and I think these are some of the most powerful data points. Again, we want to have better data than the news channels have drama. And I think these are some of the most powerful slides to show prospective buyers and sellers, because the sellers that I'm talking to are freaked out to move up to the next house, even though they're going to get top dollar for the home that they're going to sell, but they're worried about moving up and then having a big crash in housing prices on a bigger priced home. So this data is relevant in both categories, in my opinion. So this is US housing starts going back to 1960. So we're talking about 60 years worth of data. And this, 1,600, those are 1,600,000. So that'd be like 1.6 million. And if you kind of draw a line through the last 60 years, it's somewhere between this 1.2 and 1.6 million. Let's call it 1.4 million. That's kind of the average number of housing starts going back to the 60s. And in several of these decades, you saw housing starts up here over 2.4 million, next to 2 million, right before the Great Recession, over 2 million, almost 2.4 million. And these gray bars, just so we're all familiar with what happens here, these are recessions, right? So that makes sense. Good housing starts, we hit a recession, housing starts stop, they recoup. And so if we fast forward, this is the part of the graph, the last 10 years, that I find absolutely fascinating. If we agree that kind of the trend line, the middle of the highs and the middle of the lows, is somewhere between 1.4 and 1.6 million. This 1.6 million seems to be like a pretty consistent line through 2005 of where things were ebbing and flowing. And then we look from about 2000, I'm gonna guess this year is probably 2008. We cross below this 1.6 million. We go all the way down to almost 400,000. Now this is national home starts across the country, all the way down to 400,000. The lowest we've seen since before the 60s, which I think is when this data started to be tabulated and compiled. And we've spent the last 10 years, a full decade, below this trend line of 1.6 million new housing starts. And we just get back to this world of normalcy. And then look what happens right over here on the very, very far right. Crash in the number of housing starts, because COVID starts to hit and the number of housing starts go down. So you've got this lost decade right here where we have had simply not enough supply of homes. And we just saw demographically, I'm going to show you some more demographic information, But we just saw demographically, we should have more and more first-time home buyers, but we have a decade of not enough housing supply. Now compare that to the 10 years leading up to this peak here. You know, if we go back from like 2008 back here, the entire decade, we spent above 1.6 million housing starts. Now this is super interesting. When we talk about demographics, I'm gonna go a little bit out on a limb here, and hopefully nobody tells me they think I'm a crazy idiot. But in 1973, Roe versus Wade passed, and 33 years later, we saw a little bit of a demographic trough. Well, who knows what 1973 plus 33 is? 2006, right? So right at the time when, I'm going to go back a slide here, right at the time where we had this housing supply peak, what was happening on the demand side of the equation? What was happening with first-time homeowners, which are on average about 33 years old? They were hitting this demographic trough right here, because this is a 33-year hangover from Roe versus Wade, and we started to see less and less birth rates through this patch of time right here. Super interesting. Now, fast forward to where we are today. If we look today, we're in an upward swing. We have these millennials. So right during this Roe versus Wade, 2000, these people were turning 33 in 2006. We have about just over 3 million US births that are now turning 33 years old. If we fast forward to today, we're moving into this upward demographic trend where there will be over 4 million turning 33. Guys, that's 25% more buyers just demographically turning 33 over the next 4 or 5 years than we saw in this trough that happened in 2006. And then look at the trajectory right around 4 million going forward for, I don't know what that is, like the next 10, 15 years. So when we talk about what happened in 2006, we need to be super clear that this was a demographic trough. These people turning 33, we only had about 3 million a year happening. And we had about a decade of 1.6 million or more homes being built. Demographically, we're in a better place. We have a lot less inventory, more demand from these 33-year-olds, less supply because we've not built enough homes. How do you have deflation in home prices when you have more demand and less supply? It just really doesn't make sense if you look at that data. Not to speak, not to mention interest rates, right? So home prices have been greatly aided by low interest rates because housing is more affordable with those lower interest rates. So this is the S&P Case-Shiller U.S. National House Price Index. I mentioned to you earlier that clients equate recession with housing crash because that was true in the last recession. And I don't know about any of you, but that was the most painful recession I remember. I certainly lost more money in that recession than anything else I can recall. I mean, the wounds are still painful. And if we look back over a longer period of time, let's say we go back to the late 60s or early 70s, so now we're looking over 50 years of data, each of these gray bars are recessions. And we realize, hey, recessions happen. They happen every 5 to 10 years. It's not that unusual. We should anticipate that sooner or later we're going to run into another recession. And this blue line is what is Case-Shiller National House Price Index. Well, here's what I find interesting. What happened in the 70s during 2 recessions? Home prices went up. What happened here in 80? Home price went up just a tiny bit. What happened here? I think home prices were flat. In 91, we went down about 1.8% in home values. In 2001, home prices went up. So in the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 recessions, 6 out of 7 recessions, home prices went up, sideways, or down. This one was down 1.8%. Not bad. Compare that to what stocks did in those recessions. Real estate does really, really well through recessions. Here's the clear outlier, right? Housing got crushed here. But why did housing get crushed? Demographically, we didn't have enough people turning 33 years old, the average age of a first-time home buyer. We had 10 years of more building permits, more building than household formations. So we just got ahead of ourselves, and demographics went against us at the same time. Oh, and lenders forgot that you should actually have to qualify to get a mortgage, and boom. But this is a very, very different market. We have undersupply, improving demographics. You have to have credit, income, assets to actually qualify for a loan. And this is the data that we got to make sure that we're showing people that typically real estate does good in recessions. Now, why does real estate do good in recessions? Because the first thing that the Federal Reserve does when we hit economic recession or the economy starts to contract is they start reducing interest rates. Right now, they've got their bazooka out and they're spending trillions of dollars buying treasury bills, which push down long-term interest rates. They're also buying mortgage-backed securities, which they're directly interfering with the interest rate market and creating an artificial buyer for those mortgage-backed securities at super low interest rates. And that is typical for what, I mean, maybe not that exact mechanism, but lowering interest rates is what the Fed does in recessions. And that is good for housing because it makes it a little bit more affordable. The other thing that's very interesting about where we sit today as compared to where we sat going into the last recession is the amount of home equity. The amount of 125% loans, the no credit, no asset, 125% home equity lines of credit where all you needed to do. I mean, I remember I showed up to Washington Federal with literally a driver's license, and I filled out an application, and a couple days later, I came back and I got 100% line of credit on a bunch of investment properties. No income proof, no nothing, 100% financing. That was kind of the deal back then. People were using and extracting all of that equity to finance their lifestyle. Very different than what's happening today. So this is some data around the percentage of home equity. It's a little bit of a confusing graph, but if you follow me across the bottom, what this is telling you is that about almost 8% of the population has 50 to 54% equity in their home. This is the data for 2019 in gray, and this is the data in 2020 Q1 in teal. So you can see that the equity is continuing to increase in most of these categories, and look at all of this equity. And so here's the actual facts on this. 87% of homeowners have at least 20% equity in their homes, and 95% have at least 10% equity. That's crazy. That is absolutely crazy. 87% of homeowners have at least 20% equity in their homes. Why is that important? Well, if those people had to qualify for their mortgage, they could at least debt service that mortgage and had good credit and had probably some skin in the game when they took ownership. You've got demographics on our side, more first-time home buyers than virtually ever before, and a huge shortage of housing. And all of that adds up to sellers not having to fire sell their homes. The problem that happened in the Great Recession was as that, people had very limited equity, and it was like a toilet bowl, flushing. The one person sold for 10,000 less, then the other 10,000 less, and everybody just chain sold because they didn't have enough equity to get through that storm. Let me show you one more slide on the amount of equity because this really surprised me. So 58.7% of all homes in America have at least 60% equity. That is a massive amount of equity in their home. Even if you look at how the Great Recession pulled back in home values, all those people would be safe, right? None of those people would be underwater. 42.1% of all homes are owned free and clear, according to John Burns Consulting. That's crazy. That's a lot of free and clear real estate. And the average equity of the mortgaged homes, so this is take away the 42.1% free and clear homes, just what's the average equity in the mortgaged homes? $177,000 in average equity. So the point is, what's different right now from a psychological standpoint is, in the lead up to the 2006 crash, there were these exotic financial instruments that would enable you to pull out 100% of the equity on your investment properties, and 125%, I guess you wouldn't have equity at that point. So 125% of the value of the home of your primary residence, and people were upside down when the value started to falter at all. They didn't have any choice but just to throw up their hands and say, hey, I'm out of here. Very different than the way we enter this recession. And the last slide that I have to show you, or the last reason here that we're going to debunk the COVID-19 housing crash, is affordability. And I think this is really important for clients to understand, because what I hear from clients is housing prices are just too expensive. They're at an all-time high. The last time they were at an all-time high, there was a huge crash. And so there must be a crash coming, right? That's kind of how they, 1 + 1 = 2. But here's what I think is important for us to educate our buyers. It's not about price. That's only one out of the three components of the equation when we talk about affordability. So the three components of affordability are: 1, mortgage rates, which were literally at all-time lows; 2, mortgage payments as a percentage of income. In other words, if you look at what you were making in 2006 or 2007, like, who is making more money now than they were in 2006 or 2007? I think almost everybody's going to raise their hand. So if you have more income, then your mortgage payment as a percentage of income is lower now than it was going into the last recession. And then the third component there is home prices. So let's look at homeowner affordability. Let's decouple this thinking, or this linking, that high price equals there must be a crash and correction. That's the wrong way to look at it. If homes are unaffordable, which I agree did happen in 2005 up into 2006, they were getting unaffordable for the time, that causes a decrease in demand. Well, let's take a look at actual home affordability. So according to data from the National Association of Realtors, they created this housing affordability index. And basically, they take these three data points. They take mortgage rates, the mortgage payments as a percentage of income for the average American, and then they take home prices, and they come up with this affordability index. And the higher the ranking, the higher the number, the more affordable housing was. Well, going back all the way to 1990, you'll see that this range was, somewhere around the 120s, 108, 130, 125, 126. That kind of 120, 125 range was kind of the median line for housing affordability. Then housing got crazy affordability because housing prices went down dramatically. If you remember what happened in the in the Great Recession, the Fed stepped in. They started manipulating interest rates. They caused mortgage rates to hit the previous all-time low. And you had this 2 of the 3 pieces of the equation, record low interest rates and housing prices going down, caused the most affordable time ever for housing. By the way, how many people were scared to death? How many buyers? I remember talking to buyers in this time period, 2011, 2012, and I remember them saying, oh, it'll take 20 years for housing prices to ever return to their normals. Well, if they were looking at affordability, they'd have went, wait a minute. The affordability index average is 120, and now the affordability index in 2012 is 197, almost 200. Get in, this is the time. And so if we forward to today, we saw we lost a little bit of that affordability going through 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18. Interest rates started to creep up a little bit. Home prices started to creep up a little bit. Yeah, people were making more money, but with home prices and higher interest rates, housing wasn't as affordable. Fast forward to today, housing index back almost in line with where we were in the Great Recession in terms of affordability because of where interest rates are. We all know what happened to housing prices after it got really affordable. So that's the thing I'd be bringing clients back to. Look, let's go back in this slide deck and let's take a look at what happened to housing prices in 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16. Housing gets super affordable or relatively affordable. You have a limited amount of supply. There's more buyers chasing a limited amount of goods. You're going to get higher prices. That's exactly what happened in the last recession. And the people who were brave enough in the middle of this 2009, 2014, where distressed properties were dominating the market and interest rates are low, they made a killing. They're the ones sitting on all that equity that we just showed you. So obviously, homes are affordable today because of low interest rates. Federal Reserve continues to say, we're going to keep interest rates low and keep what they call an accommodative stance on monetary policy, meaning cheap loans, funding the economy with as much liquidity as possible so businesses can survive. People are motivated to go buy cars. People are motivated to buy homes. And they said they're going to continue to do that until we reach full employment. So, you know, that I don't think that low interest rate environment is going to turn off anytime in the next 6 to 12 months. I think we got a longer runway than that. So conclusion, demographics and home ownership rate indicate more first-time home buyers entering the market than ever before. That is so powerful when we show people the 33-year hangover from Roe versus Wade and how we only had about 3 million people turning 33 years of age, which is the first-time homebuyer age, and now we're at 4 million. So you've got 25% more potential buyers entering the market every year. By the way, that's a consistent trend. The inventory of new and existing homes seems likely to continue the trend toward record housing inventory shortages. We showed that chart, 3.7 million houses for sale going into the last recession, I think it was 1.8 million going into this recession. So that equals multiple offer situation, more buyers than sellers, and historically low interest rates in a market that is more affordable than any time in the last 7 years. So I'm going to end with this last quote, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. I love this, and it's so true whether we're talking about stocks or real estate or anything else. Ann Wilson says, use time, make it easy, get your money to work for you. The key is to get in the market, as it is not about timing the market, but time in the market that matters. And the reason why that really registers for me, I'm going to quit sharing here and then we'll go into Q&A. The reason why that really registers for me is I remember the first investment property my mom and I bought, and this must have been 19 years ago, and we bought a condo. And by time we closed, by the way, we didn't use a realtor. That's how smart we were. If we would have probably had data to tell us that there was a bunch of short sales for sale in this condo complex and the prices were going down. So by the time we closed on this condo, we got it renovated, we put it back on the market. There had been 4 other short sales, and the value now is about $15,000 below. Now that was a lot of money to me with my first investment. And between our updates and the market value, we're about $20,000 underwater. And I was 21 years old on my very first real estate investment. And I thought, you know, we could either just tuck our tail between our legs and sell this thing and bail, or we can find a renter. We can see if we can weather this storm. We broke even for a couple years. Then we got a new renter and we raised the rents. Then we refinanced to a lower interest rate. Then we got a new renter and raised the rents. Then a few years after that, we just paid off that stupid mortgage and now we just bank the rents. That condo we bought for $85,000 is now worth $225,000. It's insane. So going back to that quote, it's not about timing the market. It's about time in the market. And if you're a buyer who has a timeline in their home more than 3 to 5 years, and if you can afford the mortgage payment, which with these low interest rates, you can afford the mortgage payment, it's time in the market, not timing the market, that is the winner. So that's all I had in terms of data to present. I'll open it up. Any questions? Love to hear from you.
Chime in, guys, but how many of you are super happy to actually hear some good news about the market from somebody rather than our clients that all they do is bitch and whine and complain? Because they make assumptions like, oh, it's another crash, it's another, because they only notice those indicators you're talking about, Josh, that prices are high, right? Yep. And that's just one indicator. So, you know, copy the links. They're in the chat. Josh, your video is awesome. The article is well written. And some of these slides from this presentation are in there as well. I think y'all should be sharing that with your people.
I have really excited clients because they're seeing the low interest rates and they're seeing how much more they can buy with those low interest rates. And so, I don't know, I've got a lot under contract right now. People are super excited. It's a tough market out there, but I don't know, we're finding houses.
Well,
let me just agree with you, Lynn. The folks that I think, you know, there's some people who get it and they go, oh my gosh, I never thought I'd get that amount for my house. With that amount of down payment, I get a much better loan product because I've got some cash for down payment and rates are historically low. That home is now affordable. It's the people that I think really need this data are on the fence, and it causes them to balk because they really don't have a decided heart. They see the house and they go, ooh, I like it and I can afford it, but I don't know. And by the time they figure out what their next move is, there's 4 other offers, right? So for me, I think where this data comes in so importantly is to really put everybody at ease so that when they find that house and they know it's affordable, they're like, okay, what do I need to do to close this deal in 2 weeks or 3 weeks? You know, they got to be, as you know, ready to roll.
I think it's awesome.
No balking.
Well, I've always heard that the market shifts
like you said, every 5 to 10 years. But I was always under the impression that it shifts down, not steady or up. So this is kind of new data for me to be seeing. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, if you look at the National Home Price Index going back over 50 years, you know, it's kind of like that sideways to upward slant. You have the reset from the Great Recession, and then it continues back up. But if you look at that over that entire time horizon, the appreciation rate is just under 5%. It's like 4.8%. So the only time you really got yourself in trouble is if you got overextended, you had to sell right during the crash, you couldn't hold on, and you didn't wait for the thing to correct, which, you know, it corrected a lot faster than a lot of us thought it would because accommodative interest rates came down and the market started to move again. Hey, I'll say one more thing if there's not any other questions, and I welcome you to continue. But the question that I would have for you all is, number one, this is pretty easy to send out to clients individually and help them get them mentally in the right place, right? We all have clients that come to us and you're like, you are a victim of the drama. I can just tell you're controlled by all that negative news. Let me help you with some data. But that Tom Ferry interview that I sent to Sydney, and I think that Jeff put in there, he talks about how to take this content style and take it to your past clients, market it, and then create leads out of it. Actually monetize this kind of content. So if anybody wants to do that, if they want to go back to their past clients, and if they want to have like a webinar like this, maybe a shorter version, whatever, I'm happy to co-facilitate that with you. So just let me know if that's something anybody's interested in after you listen to that Tom Ferry interview, because I think the guy's a screaming genius. And he had some clients have some really good success with this.
Awesome. I like that.
Yeah. Good stuff, Josh. We sure do appreciate you. Anybody got any last questions and comments? What y'all think? You know, Josh, one thing I like to point out to my clients with these low interest rates, because we've never seen them. You know, when you and I were investing when we were younger and building portfolios and stuff, our loans are like 6, 6.5, 7, 7.75. When the interest rates are up 1% from where they currently are, that equates to a 10% change in purchasing power. So 1% jump on a $400,000 house Now you got to get that same house for $360,000 to have the same debt service. That's what we're talking about with affordability. How much of your income do you make can you put towards housing and have a nice place to live, right? So others might argue, yeah, but I'm paying $400,000. It's like, well, if this is time in the market like you're talking about, doesn't matter. You know, the properties that we had before the crash diminished, the equity just disappeared. But now they're worth more than they were at the peak in 2006 and 2007. So I just want to reiterate that time in the market thing. And I think that's a conversation we have to have with our clients.
Yeah, one other thing I would just add to that, Jeff, is I've had clients when I've had that same discussion say, oh, well, then that means when interest rates go back up, my property values are going to be slashed. And I do agree that when interest rates go up and housing becomes less affordable, that can be a drag on appreciation. But two things to consider. Nothing happens in a vacuum. In other words, when interest rates go up, that's because the economy is rocking and people are making more money. So you have more money coming in to debt service those higher interest rates. So there's a little bit of an offset there. And also, if I have a home locked at a 3% 30-year interest rate, and I do happen to sell at a time where interest rates have just shot up and maybe home values have stagnated out, what a great time to rent that property out. Because if everybody else is going to look at buying a house and they're going, well, that's a 4.25, so my 4.25 rate, so my payment's here, but you financed at 3.3%, chances are you're going to be able to rent that house out for a nice positive cash flow. So I think we should think through the next question that information brings. Is it locking in these interest rates and potentially turning these into investment properties long term? I mean, imagine if we had 60 or 70 houses locked at 3% interest rates for the last 10 or 15 years. I mean, the cash flow would just be stupid ridiculous. So this is a really, really valuable time for somebody who wants to start a real estate investing career. Buy an owner-occupied home. Next year, buy another owner-occupied home. Next year, buy another. I mean, as long as interest rates are 3%, you're going to be able to cash flow.
You know, that's one of the best things about owning real estate, right, Josh, is locking in that payment for 30 years. I mean, look at these graphs we're looking at. We're going back, 40, 50, 60 years, but time moving forward, when you're locked in for 30 years in the future, and we know that interest rates will go up, we know the economy is going to continue to get better, we know that rents are going to go up, and your debt service stays the same. Yep. I mean, Lynn and I are fortunate enough that we've seen 3 decades of that, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yep, it's a beautiful thing. You know, we bought a couple of small apartment buildings between 10 and 15 years ago now, and rents have virtually tripled. The mortgage balance is about 50% of what it originally was, and we originally financed the one building I'm thinking about in specific was at 6 3/4. We just refinanced it to 3.29%. And rarely do people think about the 15, 20 years in investments, but the trajectory is values go up, your mortgage balance goes down, and every once in a while you get these crazy opportunities to lock in ridiculously low rates. And by the way, we just keep continuing to raise those rents every month. So the longer you're in that investment, that's not like a catchy slogan. The longer you're in that investment, it just gets sweeter and sweeter. Lower rates, lower balances, and the rents keep going up.
So Josh, that goes back to what I started this training with on encouraging everybody to reach out to you for a strategy meeting. You remember that you and I used to do that all the time, right? As our portfolio built and our loan amount went up, lenders started saying, whoa, high risk, right? So we would sit down and you did the homework. You were the lender. You would say, well, based on your situation, this is what we can do. It was never a no with Josh. It was just like, we're going to find a way to keep this rolling forward. So if you all are interested in building your own personal portfolios, having that strategy session based on what can I do? You got to know that first. We all tell our buyers, get pre-qualified first. We're not going to go show you homes till you're pre-qualified. We got to know what your buying power is, right? We're going to point you in the right direction. Well, you'll be surprised how much that will help you in your conversations with your clients too. Talk about your own situation, make some plans, set some goals, build that portfolio, take advantage of these low interest rates, but your dialogue with your clients is going to change dramatically by continuing those kind of conversations with people like Josh.
Agreed. By the way, I remember those times more like, hey, Josh, you think I can buy another house? Hell, I don't know. Let's give it a shot. We'll figure it out, Jeff.
Yeah. And then there was that window of time where the loans were so crazy. Hey, Josh, can I buy another house? It's like, yeah, just show up to closing.
Yeah, I know. That was a beautiful time period. Unfortunately, that window closed.
Yeah, right.
That was good times.
So I've also copied Josh's contact information in the chat that you guys can copy over to your whatever, your notebook. Josh, did you have a slide with your contact info on it you wanted to pull up? If people could maybe screenshot that.
That would be so professional if I did, but no, I didn't. But Sydney, my friend Sydney, has my my email, and maybe she could send it to everybody. My email signature. Would that be okay?
Yep. That's literally what I copied and pasted in the chat as well. So you guys can steal those links, steal that his contact information. Again, just a last plug to reach out to Josh and have that strategy conversation for yourselves and for your clients, and just see what kind of great things you can do moving forward.
Killer.
We can send those links out via emails while we have everyone, since you guys registered. So we can do that too.
Thanks, Sydney.
Thanks, Sid.
Also, there was a question in the chat about what Fairway interview. If just scroll up in the chat, and there's a link to it's called Mindset Mechanics with Tom Ferry and Dan Keller. And basically, he's just talking about what mindset the agents need to have going into the second half of 2020. It's quick. It's like 20 minutes.
Any last thoughts?
Thanks so much, Josh. Really appreciate you.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me, and let me know if there's anything else I can do for any of you.
I appreciate you, my friend. We'll talk soon.
Take care, everybody. Bye. Thank you.
See you guys.
Thank you.